Have you ever taken a trip to some really great location, like France, for example? And you fly into Paris, and of course, you got to do the things that everybody does in Paris. Like you want to go to the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and Notre Dame and walk down the Champs-Élysées. But then you also want to spend, you're in France, you want to spend some time in the wine country. So you schedule a few days in like the Loire Valley, and you go to the different wineries and maybe visit the castles and ride your bike along the river and do all the things that are just beautiful out there in wine country. But you also know that if you don't come back to France, you definitely want to see the south of France, down in the French Riviera. So you spend some time visiting Cannes, where they have the film festival, and Saint-Tropez and Nice. Maybe you go to the casino in Monte Carlo, and you end up spending most of your time just checking in at hotels. You're on, buses and trains, maybe airplanes, just kind of all over the place. And, you realize that you didn't have time to do the thing that you really wanted to do most, which is have some downtime, recharge your battery, and, maybe spend some time, a couple hours just at a cafe, just having a cup of coffee, or maybe some time by a swimming pool. But then you think, well, the upside is, when I go home, I can tell all my friends and show them all these great places I went, show them, all my pictures. And when you do, your friends, after maybe about 20, 30 seconds, they start to drift off. They look kind of bored. You kind of feel like you're bragging, and you realize, you really didn't get much out of your vacation. So, the kids have a name for something like this. It's called FOMO, fear of missing out. It's this idea that, you got to do everything that everybody else is doing, jam pack everything, because if you don't, you might miss out on the one thing that everybody's doing that you would have loved to have done. So the concept of what I just described for travel, that's kind of a metaphor for the way a lot of us these days are living our lives, which is just to overextend, just become like incredibly stressed out, fear that if we don't, check every box, that we're going to somehow, miss out on the one thing that would have brought us some pleasure. So if you're watching this video, chances are you're at a point where you're stressed, you're overextended, you feel like life has gotten way too complicated, and that life is just too much of everything. And at the same time, that life isn't enough. So, trust me, I was there. And what I did to remedy that was to simplify my life, come to the realization that there was just too much going on in my life and I didn't need all that. So I implemented, 5 easy steps to simplify my life, to make it less complicated, less busy. And I think if you do these things, you too will find that you're going to have more time to do the things you really want to do, which is spend quality time with your loved ones, and also get to do the things that you've always wanted to do. So anyway, let's jump right in, and we'll start with the first of the 5 things. Number 1 is stop putting money and career ahead of everything else in your life. And right now I'm not talking to the folks who kind of are going to like one extreme, which is sort of quitting their job, like, buying a log or building a log cabin out in the wilderness and not having running water or electricity. And I'm not criticizing or making fun of those people. Like, that's kind of a new thing, and that's great if that's what makes you happy. But that's not who I'm talking to right now. I'm talking to the people who, like me, want to be fulfilled in their job, but, shouldn't buy into the false promise that career success and wealth are ultimately going to make you happy, because they don't. The reality is, I think hard work is a good thing. I teach that to my kids all the time. Like do a good job, work hard, and that kind of keeps you grounded. It's good for your soul, and achieving some, I don't know if I want to say success, but achievement in your vocation. It's very rewarding, and that's a good thing. But I'm talking about, having some balance, that, you got to put limits on how much time and how much of yourself you're going to devote to your day job. Because the reality is, there is a diminishing return on how much you put in. Like the first 80% is where you really get the value. The first 80% of your effort, your time, your attention, that improves the value of the output. The last 20%, which is, kind of what pushes you over the edge, that could push you into like burnout or resentment or just kind of hating your job or, just, again, squeezing out all the good things in your life, you really don't get a return on that investment. It doesn't show up in the work product, and it's not even noticed by your colleagues or your managers or anybody. It's kind of a wasted effort. And the other important point is, if you want to achieve job satisfaction without kind of just putting your entire self, your whole identity into your job, check your ego at the door. I think it's people's ego that cause them to act in extreme ways and maybe like devote a little too much of their own sort of life energy to their jobs. I think this myth that the super confident, aggressive, kind of tough guys, are the ones who get ahead in corporate America. I don't believe that. My own personal experiences, I was at a job. And it was, I think when my kids they were in like elementary school, like just a really fun age. And I really wanted to make sure I had time with them. Like I didn't want my job just to like suck every last minute out of my life, so I would miss that time with them. And I was in a position where I felt like there really wasn't a lot of room for advancement, promotion. I just felt that. So I just kind of resigned myself that I was going to do a good job because I have to. That's how I'm wired. But I wasn't going to go overboard, and I wasn't going to be thinking about the next thing, like what, down the road and just always the future. I just focused on putting in a good day's work and making sure that I had time to spend with my kids and my wife on the evenings and the weekends. And I actually that was a time in my career where I think I got promoted the quickest. And that's because I think I was more relaxed and I was just a nicer person. And I truly believe that, the nice guys out in the working world, especially these days, they're appreciated and I think they do better. I think that professionalism, being cordial, polite, like that's going to get you farther. So one thing I'll say too about, putting aside career, but as far as money goes, the lie that money is going to make you happy. My grandmother, my Yaya Fofa, she's my Greek grandmother, and Yaya means grandmother. She said something very wise, which was "Oli metamatia" when she was referring to wealth. So that's Greek. It means it's all with the eyes. Everything that you see, everything wealth can buy you, what money can buy you, it's all stuff you look at. It's all stuff out there. It doesn't go to your core. It's not what makes you, gives you joy and happiness. It's just stuff that you can use to impress other people. And at the end of the day, that's not what brings you happiness in this life. So I would say that the second, step or trigger toward living a simple, humble life is staying connected to nature. You got to spend time outdoors, whatever it is you like to do outside. For me, I like working in the yard, whether that's laying mulch or, pruning the shrubs or, planting or, even sweeping the driveway. I like getting my hands dirty. I like being outside. For me, it's relaxing and it's recharging. But whatever it is you like to do, some people like to ski. Other people are into boating. Maybe you just like taking long walks in the woods. Whatever it is, you need to get outside. Another thing you can do is sort of stay connected with nature is cooking. Cooking with like natural ingredients, making a good, healthy, delicious meal. Sharing it, with your loved ones. It's very fulfilling. It's good for the body. It's good for the soul, and it just makes you feel good. I would say, the third step, and this is probably the most important toward living sort of a simple, humble, uncomplicated life, is making sure you stay connected with our Creator, with God. And that means, keeping in mind our purpose here on earth, which is, to live according to God. God has a unique plan for each and every one of us. So live according to his plan and live our lives to become better versions of ourselves. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by loving God and loving one another, serving each other with kindness and humility and forgiveness, and just living an honorable life. And I would avoid getting into like arguments or debates with other people about sort of the man-made rules and doctrines and rituals of a lot of organized religions. It's not to say that you shouldn't be part of an organized religion or go to church. I think those are good things, but don't get involved in all the crazy fighting about these details about stuff that probably don't come directly from God anyway. And keep your eye on the prize, when it comes to spirituality, which is our ultimate reward for living a life well lived, an honorable life, and a simple life. And that reward is, living in God's eternal kingdom someday. Number 4 may seem paradoxical, but, if you want to have a simpler life, you need to be more efficient with your time. Because, if you can get stuff done quicker, then you can get the stuff that you have to get done out of the way, so you have more time to do the things that you want to do. Spend time with family and do the things you really love to do. And also just have a little more downtime, time to relax. So how do you become more efficient? Well, there are books on that. In terms of like working smarter, not harder, and all that. But number 1 is you got to be healthy. If you're healthy, you're going to be able to work better, quicker, more efficient. Your output's going to be better than if you're not. And I used to always say to my kids, there are 5 very simple things to promote good health. Number 1 is eating well, good nutrition, drink lots of water, get exercise, get plenty of sleep, at least 7 hours, preferably 8. And last, we already went over, which is sort of being right with your Creator. And then, on the issue of being efficient with your time, one thing you really got to be careful of is indulging in social media. That could be just an incredible time suck. And a lot of what's on social media, I get it. It's very addictive. It kind of sucks you in. It's kind of fun, entertaining, but kind of in a negative way. When you think about it, most of what you see is deriding or poking fun of whether it's celebrities or even just regular people on various like sites, Instagram, whatever it is, and it just kind of generates a lot of sort of toxic energy in yourself. It's not a healthy form of entertainment, and it's so easy. Like once you get sucked in, just to start, like 10 minutes turns into an hour and then another hour, and the reality is you have so little spare time, to do the things you want to do. Don't waste it on social media. Just really try to resist that. And then, the 5th thing, I'm going to give you it's a spoiler alert. If you're into, drinking, you're into alcohol and you're committed to like continuing those patterns, you might want to fast forward over this, the 5th one, to this section, because I do get a little preachy. And that's because, I feel that, the effects of alcohol, are so undermining to sort of a happy, balanced, simple, uncomplicated life that, you're better off without it. I've always, from the time my kids were little, I always said to them, guys, if you never take a drink in your life, you're going to be better off. Now, I have a beer or two, at dinner when I'm out once in a while. But I think anything beyond that, the reality is alcohol is a toxin, and that sort of buzz you feel, that's your body's reaction to a chemical that, isn't healthy. And it's just it kind of depletes you of energy and, it makes you less efficient. And in the end, it does complicate your life in a negative way. So I think it's important, if you're having, 2 or 3 glasses of wine with dinner every night, like that's an issue. And I think if you can work toward eliminating that, you're going to find that your life is going to be a lot more balanced. Your relationships are going to be better. You're going to find you have more time on your hands, and you're just going to feel better. If there's one overarching sort of takeaway from all this, it's that you only get one shot at this life. And if you're always just focused on like the next thing, whether that's making more money or, your next promotion, career success or owning more stuff or, checking every box and doing every activity, because you have this fear of missing out that you're not going to participate in something that everybody else is doing, you're going to miss out. You'll miss out because all of those concerns, they just squeeze out the time and your energy to focus on the things that really do make you happy, which you can only do when you have some downtime, when your life is more simple. And those are the things that, bring you true joy and peace. And that applies to your kids too. When our kids were growing up, I know, we went overboard in terms of, booking activities for it seems like every day of the week for the kids. It was, sports, fall, winter, spring, and summers. It was like every day was booked up with a different activity. It was funny. I was talking to my son, our twins are now 20, and he said to me, Dad, like the best summer of my life, the best time of my life was the summer of 2020 during COVID. And that was a time when obviously everybody was homebound. There were no activities. You couldn't go anywhere. And my son Christopher said, it was like every day we just hung out. Me and my friends just hung out at Evans, and we just rode our bikes all day. We rode our bikes all over Massachusetts. It was just, and he said it was just so fun. It was so relaxing. I just had so much fun that summer. And that was very, very telling to me. So here's the thing. If you're at a point in your life where you kind of feel like the walls are, caving in on you, you're just so overextended. It's just, life is just too much of everything all the time. And you just don't have you just want to throw in the towel because you're just exhausted. You're feeling like you're maybe even close to getting burned out. It might be time to do a reset and sort of rethink, why God put you here on this earth, and how you can achieve true and lasting, joy and peace. So that's what this channel, my YouTube channel is about. So if you want to hear more about that, please do hit the subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you again.